Welcome to Kings of the Roundtable. I'm Keith Cornelick, and with me today is Dennis Bernstein of the Fourth Period, Jesse Cohen of All the King's Men podcast and Fox Sports West, John Hoven of Mayor's Manor, Brian Slagle of Metal Blade Records, and Earl Skakel, host of the Inappropriate Earl podcast and stand-up comedian. Boys, let's talk some hockey. So we've had 1 year with Rob Blake as general manager of the Los Angeles Kings. Jesse Cohen, how do you do?
Starting off with me, all right. I thought he did as well as could possibly be expected given the situation he was thrown into. He retooled the bottom six on the fly all year long. He got them back into the playoffs, managed a tough cap situation, and rebuilt a prospect system that currently is ranked in the top 10 according to The Athletic. So that's not nothing.
Who? Oh, yeah. Sorry. And there's a point that John made last year about this organization that I think has been fixed, what Jesse just mentioned. And John said last year that nobody was on the same page. And I think at this point in time, whatever the results are from last season, solid regular season, not a good playoff run, they are on the same page. It looks like there's one voice, there's one mission. Everybody's really united together to make this a more contending team this season. So I think that's the one benefit, that it looks like there's no divisiveness. Certainly the players like the coach a lot better, and I think it showed in the performance. So I think if I had to grade Rob, it's probably B plus, A minus. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I gave him a B plus earlier this summer on NHL radio, and I would say B plus is where I feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. It's not just about what happened in the playoffs that maybe takes away a little bit, but there still are some questions. You look at and we're going to get into it, I'm sure, but you look at what happened with the top six. Iafallo had a chance up there. Now Ilya Kovalchuk. There's still some work to be done with this team. But solid, as Jesse mentioned. You just look across the board and what he's been able to accomplish in a very short period of time with a tough cap situation. And I think probably the thing that hasn't been talked about as much as it should be is on the prospect side. And their restructuring of their management and how Mike Fuda is being used now in terms of talent acquisition and finding players outside of the traditional measures of free agency and draft, and really going and looking at Europe and looking at some of these junior players where their draft eligibility had expired and adding some people to the organization. I think it's gonna pay dividends as they move forward, especially with a tight cap and so many players at the high end. They're gonna need those inexpensive players like a Fantenberg to come in and make an impact.
Well, I was really critical last year of the team that they didn't have any prospects at all, basically. Maybe one. And now there's definitely a few, which I think that's a huge step forward. Because any team that's going to be successful down the road, you have to have the prospects. And to your thing about the top six, so you've got a lot, like you said, you've got a lot of cap-heavy guys up there. So you need these young kids to come in at the entry-level contracts to come in and make a difference. And that's going to be the difference between this team being barely a playoff team and actually being a competitive team trying to win a cup again. But I do give credit to Blake, where the one thing that I felt he did that was really impressive was get Kovalchuk. I mean, he got that for nothing. No draft picks, no nothing, no trade, no nothing. And it's a valuable asset. I mean, we'll see. I'm sure we'll talk more about him as we go on. We'll see how he is 5 years not playing in the NHL, but still a great player. And if you look at when Jágr came back in, he assimilated pretty well and had a couple really good years. So it's very possible Kovalchuk could do the same thing. And that was a big thing. I think that was a really big thing for Blake to get, because a lot of teams after him. I mean, everybody's after him, really.
And that was really one of the reasons that they targeted him early on, is that Rob was reluctant to trade away assets, knowing that he only had a few assets. He was reluctant to trade away assets to get that player. So to be able to sign him, we can and should and will debate the term and the money, but it's nice to be able to add a player of that ilk to the organization without having to give up any assets. I would agree.
Yeah, Earl, as a lifelong Kings fan, you weren't feeling so great about this team coming last season. How's your outlook right now?
Well, I think, like Jesse said, Blake did the best with what he inherited, much like Lombardi did with what he inherited. I mean, I think Kovalchuk was really the only option for the Kings to, obviously, against Vegas, they lacked scoring. And you see what Buffalo gave up for Skinner and what whoever's going to give up for Panarin. Like, they just don't have that yet to to do. So
Well, what they lacked against Vegas was not necessarily scoring, which obviously is the obvious. They lacked speed. And that, to me, is still the biggest problem with this team, is they don't have the speed of teams like Vegas, like Edmonton, like Calgary now. So that's my biggest question for the Kings now, is where does the speed come from? And you don't really have to have blindingly fast players. And to that end, Vegas has Derek England, who is not a blindingly fast defenseman, but he was one of their top defensemen because he plays the game quickly. They get the puck out quick, first pass out quick. Yep. And the Kings system does not do that. And that's the one big thing, is how do they fix that? How can they fix that? John Stevens has never been that type of coach that has a quick play system. They're still playing the same system basically that won them the 2 cups. How do they adapt to the new NHL, the faster NHL, the speedier NHL? That's my biggest question for this team.
I'm not sure that I totally agree with that. I think at the beginning of last year, they were playing much quicker.
Did you watch the Vegas series?
No.
They were destroyed.
Hold on.
Those games would have been 6-0 if it wasn't for Jonathan Quick.
Okay, they weren't destroyed, first of all, because every game was a 1-goal game. Everybody
Only because of Jonathan Quick.
Well, they still have Jonathan Quick. That's the team. You can't talk about playing the LA Kings without playing Drew Doughty or without Jonathan.
But he can't play that way every game because he kind of faded to the end because he made, 70 saves in that one game.
Well, okay, I don't think Quick faded at the end. But let's go back to what you said, though. They did play a quicker and faster brand of hockey in the first part of the season last year. What I will say is that as the season went on, and perhaps it had to do with the fact that Carter wasn't around, they did seem to go back into that defensive-oriented system, and they weren't playing the way they were playing at the beginning of the year. I'm very curious to see if when they come out of the gates this year, if they can play the same type of hockey that they were playing the first 6-8 weeks of last season with a healthy Jeff Carter, with some of these younger players they're adding into the system, whether that's a Paul Ledoux or a Brickley or Velarde or some of those other players that can bring that youth and enthusiasm, which is a lot of times where the speed comes from. It doesn't necessarily come from the speed of the players, but just everybody playing a quicker game, like you were talking about. And they did that in the beginning of last year.
I agree.
How much of that was coaching? Getting onto John Stevens as head coach. How much is John Stevens responsible for that? And what grade would you give his performance this year?
John Stevens, that's a tough one.
The fans would agree.
Yeah, it's
a faction of fans would agree.
Yeah.
the first half.
I would say, B- maybe. I think that you have to give John Stevens credit for the fact that he was able to do exactly what they wanted him to do, which is to get Dustin Brown going again, to get an MVP caliber season out of an Andrei Kopitar. And part of that, yes, is that the players were excited and engaged because Daryl Sutter was no longer there. But at the end of the day, the guy behind the bench, which in this case was Stevens, still has to get them to do that. So it's one thing for Sutter to be gone, but John Stevens did have to manage through 82 games last year. And I also have to give Stevens credit that he found a way to patchwork it together during a time when Jeff Carter missed the bulk of the season. Yeah. He tried some stuff. Alex Iafallo on the top line. I also give him credit for that. Ultimately, it didn't give you more than 9 goals, but you would have never seen a player like Alex Iafallo up on the top line during the Daryl Sutter regime. You would have seen a 4th-line grinder who was up there trying to play alongside Andrei Kopitar. So
and
I give Stevens credit for that.
Iafallo gave him some speed, too. He helped with making that line, even though he didn't score a lot of goals.
He's the engine that makes that line go.
Exactly.
So yeah, and I think that from that standpoint, you give Stevens credit. I just would have liked to have seen a little bit more creativity, and I didn't think that he adjusted enough during the Vegas series. And sure, his hands were tied in the second game when, Doughty and Muzzin and Forbort and everybody's out, but I'd say B-.
See, his evaluation this year will be different than last year. Last year, he righted the ship.
Yeah.
It was a disenfranchised team. You watch the last 20 games of Daryl Sutter's coaching career in Los Angeles, the team didn't care. They didn't care. They went out there and just went through the motions that they needed to right the ship there. They needed to get re-engaged. They are. They like this coach. And I know some fans don't like the fact that they actually like the coach, but that's important. This is 2018. What people don't understand is that if the players don't like you, you're gone. They're on, Drew's making 11, Andrei's making 10, Brown's making 6. You gotta like them. It's different. It's a different mentality. It's a different approach. You can't just be, General Patton out there and then go take that hill. It doesn't work that. Players want to know why. I think John took the extra step of why and explaining things how it happened, not just throwing players out there and it's just my way or the highway. That just doesn't work anymore, and that's why you have 2 former Hall of Famers in the front office. That's why you have Stevens there, who's a more beneficial coach who the players like better. It's the tone has to be different. Players just don't respond. So I give him a B+ A- because he righted the ship. But this year, right? I will say this, they're a contender for the division. And they don't win the division because I think Vegas is going to regress. Not sure about San Jose. They're getting older as well. I'm not sold on Edmonton or Calgary. The Ducks, I don't think Kessler's going to play this year. If he is, he's not. He's going to be in a very reduced role. Like, they have to win the division because if they win the division, they're a 2 seed. And if you're a 2 seed, you're a contender for the cup. It's as simple as that. So I think the grading this year will be a much tougher curve for John Stevens.
I'm a little more bullish, perhaps, on Anaheim than you might be. I mean, they've done a much better job of integrating young players into their system, and I don't think their season hinges on what happens with Ryan Kessler.
Troy Terry could step right in and be a better player than Kessler was. So
yeah,
I'm
fine with the Ducks. I think they're absolutely a contender. I think San Jose is a contender as well, as the Kings.
I don't think you can discount a team that won the division 5 years in a row and then finished second in an injury-plagued season with a mystery Vegas team that caught everybody by surprise. When it comes to Stevens, to Dennis's point about the players liking him and whether or not the fans care about that, in a season where Carter missed 55 games, your best players all had career years. So you can say what you want about the playoff run or missed opportunities, but at the end of the day, Stevens had the same job that Blake did, right? Which was fix a team that had gone off the rails. And he did as good a job as I think could have been reasonably expected of him.
I think this year, though, he'll be judged more harshly because he'll have Kovalchuk. You have to figure the likelihood of Kopitar and Brown maybe dropping off a bit, how Toffoli and Pearson play. Like, he has a full complement. Carter's back, so there's really no excuses for him this year. Like, he'll be judged a lot more like, okay, you've got the full team now.
Everybody says that about, I'm just switching off of Stevens for a second. I've heard a lot of people say that about Kopitar and Brown and a regression and not having a career year. I'm not really clear on where this comes from.
I agree.
Andre Kopitar should have, there's no reason to expect that he would have any season less than what he had last year.
I'll tell you where this comes from. This comes from, and this one thing that drives me crazy. I have a lot of friends that cover hockey all over the country, all over the world. And this East Coast bias, like, to me, in my opinion, Drew Doughty is the best defenseman in the NHL and has been for the last 6 years. The fact that he's won one Norris Trophy is a joke. I mean, he's got 2 cups, which trumps everything else. But it drives me nuts, and it's because the East Coasters don't watch him. And for whatever reason, when he plays in New York, he doesn't play very well, which doesn't help him. But he's phenomenal. And same thing with Kopitar. Kopitar has always been a great player. Only season he didn't have was the last season under Sutter, and there was just a connection there that didn't work. So clearly Stevens and Kopitar are on the same page, and how Kopitar can't have a better season. I mean, look, if it's going to be Kopitar, Brown, and Kovalchuk, and those guys meld together, which they theoretically should. I mean, he could have the best season he's ever had. I think Doughty, Quick, and Kopitar are all going to have great seasons.
Well, I hope they do.
I mean, great players like that. These are Hall of Fame players with Stanley Cup resumes. I don't think they're going to regress, and they're 31, and they're both 31.
Kopitar's in the prime of his career.
But if Kopitar has 82 points, that's a 10-point regression.
Right.
But if they pick up 10 points in the standings because he clicks with Kovalchuk and the power play is better, and he's a Selke candidate again, people can talk about a regression until the cows come home. I don't care. The only thing I care about is, does the team improve?
Yeah.
Okay.